Welcome to The Chat. Come behind the inbound scenes of some of the world's fastest growing companies. For the past 10 years as Chatmetrics, we've had an exclusive inside view of how these industry leaders are revolutionising inbound marketing and sales across diverse sectors. Each week, we bring you conversations with top minds in marketing and sales who share insider secrets and strategies for driving inbound success. Join us on The Chat, your front row seat to the future of inbound. In your experience, you mentioned working with both e-commerce and business to business, but in your experience working with brands across the board, what's one common marketing mistake that you see even seasoned professionals making? How can they avoid it?
I think across the board, the most common thing that we hear is we did this, we made a decision on this campaign, and when they tell me it's not working, as you dig into the ideation of that campaign and you dig into the rationality of why they did it, how they did it, some of those, marketing still is quite assumptive. And I go back to the conversation we had at the beginning. There are so many areas of research. You don't even have to use BMG. You can use any other one. You can Google, what have you. It's still so incredibly assumptive that I actually worked with a company that did not know the newest number of potential customers because they've been using the same data for 3 years. And I Googled it and it's 3 times larger.
Wow.
And they're still underperforming. So it was just one of those where this assumptive mindset of, hey, we think this amount and they can use their own internal data. It's the external data that they're missing out on. It's the what's going on in the marketplace. What are people saying? Not just what your customers are saying, because your customers have already bought into you. They've already drank Kool-Aid and are paying you. So their information is already inherently different than people who've never heard of you and people who didn't buy from you. And so you've got to go outside and you've got to talk to not only just existing customers, but future customers to say, why didn't you buy from me? I genuinely want to know because I think we're competitors in X, Y, and Z, only for you to hear it. In this instance, though, I didn't know they were in that market. That's why I was confused why they called me.
Yeah.
And the amount of times we saw that in this particular instance, and without them realizing that and again, they were only going a third of the actual market they had. They happened to be in a space that AI could actually pivot really well, which is why their TAM 3x'd over the course of 3 years, which should have been an amazing thing, but they didn't even know it. So there's just this assumptive first mindset of you can look at your internal data as much as possible, but the external data is more important because that's where the market's going.
Absolutely. So it's really making those assumptions and not being other-centered in terms of...
Not validated or thinking about around it. It's one of the reasons I think actually fractional roles play a really strong element to it, regardless if it's C-suite or up and down anywhere in those space, but bringing in freelancers, bringing in fractionals to say, hey, I'm seeing this with these other elements, that augmented team that can not only support you from where you need people, but also support you as just what's going on in your space or potentially in other spaces. A lot of life sciences and tech experience, but now that I work in many others, I'm much more versatile in stealing from what works in one region and then applying it to a different industry.
So the acumen helps, but it's also the fact that you're coming in with a lack of bias as well.
Exactly. Because you're not married to the idea, you're married to the performance.
Correct. The idea or the organization or the personalities. Yeah, amazing. If you had to predict one major shift in consumer behavior over the next few years, what would it be and how should marketers prepare for that?
I think we're actually already seeing the biggest one. And I don't think it's realized. I think it's starting to trickle. It's that human to human experience and how much more valuable that will be. Meaning, to your point, when we got rid of bellhops and bellmans and all these other people in the process, it diminished. The entire customer experience diminished. And therefore, you became much more of a commoditized model. The more you remove the humans from this process, I think commoditization will follow very soon, much sooner than maybe we've seen in past history. So bringing back that human touch, even if it is that phone call or chat conversation or what have you, and I actually think that customer support roles, even their salaries may increase because of being able to do something really well and build connection with customers. That will come into play much more drastically. And none of those even require technical skills. They're all soft skills around, can you connect with another person
Yeah.
virtually or
Yeah.
in person or what have you. So
Mm.
I think we're already starting to see that. I think it's just going to start paying in spades once we get through this past, I think there's another 2 years or so where we see the bottom line benefits of automating technology, but not the perception shift that will come, because perception is often a delaying factor. Unfortunate part, though, is once you have a perception filled at that period, then you have another delaying factor before you can change it again. You go through these peaks and valleys, and it takes a while to run up the next mountain.
And really interesting. It's one of those things that, as a business owner myself, you consider what are the potential risks, where's the next opportunities. And we're a people business. Our purpose is people. It's as simple as that. We're focused on making sure that we can help as many people as possible become financially independent. And so when I see what's happening with AI, it's almost with a heavy heart, I think, is our business at risk? There's AI chatbots. Will it get to a stage where it can have those conversations? And it will, most definitely. I have no doubt that AI will get to the stage where it can have very credible conversations. But there's one thing that underlies it that I watch in our business like a hawk, and that is the percentage of people that chat with us that ask and want clarification whether they're speaking to a chatbot or to a person. And that is a big number. It's so before COVID, that used to sit around 18 to 20%. Since COVID, it's running at about 33%. Nearly a third of every conversation we have, the person is clarifying whether there's a person there or not. There's another 6% that we're seeing now that assume that they're speaking with a chatbot. You can tell it starts off very staccato conversation, one words, very demanding. And then when they realize, without asking, but when they realize it's actually a human on the other side, it becomes conversational. Everything softens again. And so seeing that, I've got goosebumps as I'm talking about it actually, because seeing that is the one thing that's actual real evidence that tells me that there'll never be a time, I think, in my lifetime when we see an acceptance that AI is the best place to have all of these conversations. And it does vary. The percentages vary across our different clients and depends a little on the demographics and the type of product or service or problems that are being solved. There's a lot less open conversations, for instance, in the cybersecurity sector. They tend to be much more closed and would, quite frankly, would probably prefer to have a conversation with a chatbot, or there's a real tendency not to want to hand over any information in a conversation at all, quite frankly, online in a chatbot. And you can understand that. And then other fields where it's more to do with sales or marketing's type solving problems, even things like cloud storage. The ability to have an anonymous conversation without asking for an email address up front just changes the persona when somebody's going from thinking they're talking to a chatbot to a human being. And it fills me with confidence that, look, we are in a good place. It's a very tight niche where we are. All we do is live chat. All we do is focus on that lead generation. And I think we'll be okay. We'll be okay for a little while. And we are also working on some software to make sure that we're not excluding ourselves, where people want to have a combination or a mix of AI and chatbots and so forth. So we've got that covered as well. But I don't see us changing our unique offer at this point in time anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's a really poignant way of, again, not that we're ignoring AI, certainly not. And we're even embracing it. It's this concept of knowing where it has, driving innovation in areas that make an impact, and then putting the human back into the buying process, because at the end of the day, a human's going to make that decision, regardless of what decision-making tools or artificial intelligence analysis that can do. they're going to follow that emotional sentiment to go forward.
I can actually see a day in enterprise, they'll have the resources to achieve it, where on the provider side, there's an AI API effectively, which is open to buyers' AI APIs, where the API looks across the organization and says, these are all the things that we do. This is the tech that we need. This is the best way to set this up. I'm going to go to the market, find it out where it is. I think it'll be a service that's offered. And then those providers, AI speaks to AI and so we've got these solutions, these are the problems, what do you do, what are your features, et cetera, et cetera. And you get to the point where in a very short amount of time, the procurement process will change in that there's a recommendation made by AI and the whole white paper effectively saying these are the recommendation made by AI and the whole white operations, these are the human will still make the final decision. But it's problems we're solving for. This is the consider businesses in any way to that level of.
I would actually argue that some elements of those already exist and that across all of it, not to the point where there's two APIs talking to each other and conversing, but for those that are using AI today, it's that search engine, which is why we're even promoting more organic content to be generated, because then the AI can say, here's a reference that you should use. Our clients are seeing a bump in traffic from websites like ChatGPT and Gemini and some of these others because they've generated enough good content based on the question that or the prompts that someone is filling in. It's not the whole procurement process, but it is part of the decision-making factor that I think is really important for you to consider. And it's already happening. So that's why I creating a full circle around like, how are people engaging with these systems? It's going to be that enabler. And to your point, how many times have you like done an analysis and you're like, oh, that doesn't look right, or gone against the grain around it and then done some more research? I think that's actually a very common thing to do, especially with personalities that are in the C-suite where their seasoned experience is why you bring them to the table. Because transparently, if we're going to get to that level, then why do we need a CEO?
True. You still need someone to make the decision at the end, but
if we're always they default to the AI model.
If we default to the AI model, why do you need anyone in management?
Sure. Why do you need any workers?
You still need somebody to do the work. It'll be to deliver the service.
For AI to do the work.
Goodness, that's too much of a mind blow this time of the day. I mean, look, there's one common theme in nearly every conversation we've had, and it seems to be that trust is a common theme in every conversation I've had on this vodka. With consumers more skeptical and savvy than ever, what's the key to building trust quickly in today's fast-paced digital landscape that's moving at light speed, it seems, where they have access to almost all the information that they need, don't need and don't want often at their fingertips?
Personal level, I have a process on how I build it, and it leverages a lot of the things that I value. I value transparency. I use reciprocity as my trust building kind of lever and going from a value first mentality, because I think we're in a world where the hustle mentality and some of these other elements are great because it means that people are driven and ambitious and so on. But it also opens up a ton of opportunity for the bad actors out there. And that's why consumers have to be savvy. So my process is actually taking it slower, maybe in your benefit, because especially the work that I do, and a lot of my customers that are in really heavy enterprise organizations like pharmaceutical or cybersecurity or some of these other elements, they have to, in order for their message to be heard, they have to remove themselves from that cognitive overload, from that massive amount of information that cannot be absorbed. So actually going a slower pace, maybe in your benefit, especially if you're having that conversation to conversation model, at least in that medium around it. And we do that even in our messaging across the board. I personally leverage that, and everybody has a slightly different identity and personality around it. But it's a great process to think about. There are about 8 pillars of building trust, and one of them is consistency. And you can't really be consistent if you're not yourself. Once you figure out how you adapt to the others around How are you going to show commitment and fulfill that commitment? How are you going to show empathy and display that even in areas that you can't relate to, but you can still empathize? I think compassion and empathy can be conflated, but they are two very different elements around that. So those are the things that I recommend people kind of work through is go back to thyself and then identify how you're going to build trust around it. Because of those 8 pillars, I think actually consistency is the hardest one to fulfill, because if you're in a market like this, and transparently, if you're in the market inherently, the faster you build trust, the faster you're going to solidify those relationships. And then they will be more willing to hear not only what they need, but what things that they may not necessarily want to hear, and will appreciate that openness for you to share that with them. We experience that a lot, especially between Exec HQ and BMG. Bad news, here's what it is. Good news is there's some pathways to figure it out, but most clients aren't going to want to hear just the bad news without an opportunity there. Being able to deliver that in a way that's compassionate is important.
And what about through your marketing? What about when you're getting out there and trying to grow pipeline? What's the fast track to trust with prospects?
I think part of it is everybody likes data, but no one actually remembers the data. They remember the story behind the data. As you think about where your goals are and how much pipeline you want to grow and how much you want to close, it goes back to that GAPS model of figure out what the psychology of your buyers is and figure out what they buy and where they buy. And what is the sentiment and perception you need to have for them to be able to trust you? Because I'll use a really good example. A few years ago, I was working with an accounting company. They had a plethora of tax services that was incredibly brilliant. They saved organizations so much money just from being able to reallocate funds back into their employee systems that obviously their customers would happily do if it gave them an opportunity to reduce their tax risk. But they wanted to be on TikTok. And I'm like, but your average buyer is here. So how much would they appreciate that? Maybe the junior accountant or the staff accountant may see that. And what are they going to do? Forward that TikTok to their CFO who makes all these decisions? They're not really a normal buying pattern. What they probably will do is the CFO will attend a conference at one of these elements, and that's where you should be having conversations around it. Or they will go to their peers or their communities, because that's what a lot of tax advisors do. So it's going through that process. And yeah.
Yep, true. It's interesting from a personal experience. We're very focused or have exposure to a very small range of the buying process. It's really that first from where they start researching through to they're ready to reach out to the organization. And we find that the best way to lose trust is when you're asking up front. It's like when there's a chatbot that's asking for an email or even just asking for contact information, where a chatbot asks for an email up front. We sit in live chat software for clients in other live chat software that's not our own. And often they'll have a chatbot on the front end, and the chatbot says, do you want to talk to sales or support? Somebody clicks sales. So you know that they're definitely coming down that path. The next question is, can I just have your email address in case we get disconnected? One, who's going to get disconnected? And if we do in this day and age, is it someone I really want to be working with? And two, why? No, I don't even know. I haven't been able to ask you the first question yet. Why would it give you my email address? And then conversely, the approach that we take is exactly the opposite. So that one particular customer I can quote, when they checked the drop-off rate from people that clicked sales and then didn't put their email address in, it was 96%. So 96% of people that wanted to speak to sales dropped off when they were asked for an email address. Now, if that's not breaking trust, I don't know what is. Conversely, the way that we handle things on a day-to-day basis, what we consider to be a best practice is that when you're entering into a chat, you want to find out somebody's first name, but you never, ever ask for any contact details until you've almost at the end of the conversation. If it turns out that they might be a good prospect, if they fit your client's ideal client profile, then and only then do we start, and we've qualified to a certain extent, Then do we ask for an email address? And it's usually in the way, would you like us to book an appointment for you so that you can take the conversation further? And in doing that, you end up with 10 times more email addresses than you do by having the chatbot ask for it at the front
All
end.
right.
It's the trust that you get when you have an anonymous conversation with somebody is phenomenal, because allowing them to stay anonymous, they share so much more information rather than, and there's a level of trust there that to me, when you ask for contact details up front, it shows neediness. If there's no neediness and you're happy to share their information and give answers to their questions, it just takes that croc brain component down to a level of relaxation and go, okay, they're not trying to get my contact details. That they don't look too needy. It might be a good place to continue this conversation. So I think that's a good way to do trust. So.
I think we go back to that comment around this is a game, and our buyers have figured out the game. You're trying to take 2 steps over without, frankly, earning those 2 steps. And I think that's really what trust is. It's an earned quality around it. So to your point, the more we can show value on the front end, the better it's going to be at the tail end. And I think marketing sometimes says, what if we just ask for this thing or just ask for that thing? I'm like, the more barriers you offer, the harder it is. It's the whole gated model, the gated content model. It worked for what, a minute and a half, and then you had all these fake emails in your database or your temporary emails, because now that's the whole industry that we've created because of the game that we self-developed in our own model. And I think that having those honest conversations and just saying, hey, this is what we do, it drives way further. And the neediness component, I think that is one of the biggest perception killers in our world, is you're coming off way too needy and desperate, and I'm going to sell you as much as I can. Easiest path to get a sales, but somebody who is genuinely interested in potentially buying your product to run away the other direction. And then your competitors can thank you for that sale because they actually had a particular need.
Yeah, exactly. Ellza, I have to ask you, there's a question I always like to ask at the end, or 2 questions I like to ask at the end. Firstly, are you reading any good books at the moment? Are there any books, or you've read any books that you'd like to recommend?
I just finished. I haven't started my next one because transparently I haven't decided what my next one is. I just finished Outlive by Peter Attia. It is a longevity health span lifespan book. It's really interesting for those of you that are in how do I balance everything? Transparently, I'm reading it because I just finished reading a bunch of Blue Zone books, and it was a recommended environment. It was very interesting. Everything from where we are today in the state of medicine and so on. And if you read it, you can actually see the person, as we're talking about trust, you can see the person building trust throughout the storytelling process. So it was a really great read in that element to say there are things that the author is doing to build off of it. And it comes from, Peter Attia comes from both a medicine and a corporate background, specifically a analytical background on the corporate side. So being able to slice that in a different way when it comes to overall health and longevity is really interesting. For those of you that are interested in that topic, I'm pretty deep in that world.
It seems to be trending. I'm certainly very interested in it, but there's more and more available these days, or maybe I'm just seeing more in my feed because I'm showing some interest in it as well. So thank you. I haven't heard of that one, so I'll definitely read that. And the other question is, looking back, is there one piece of advice or something that you would say to Ellza Malok, who was 16 years old, ready to launch into the rest of your life?
Oh, I think the biggest thing that I would tell that person is the world is your oyster. I transparently, because my moving here, we didn't necessarily have the access to aunts and uncles that worked in corporate life or what have you. So I saw the world as very I could be a lawyer, I could be a doctor, I could be some of those things. And neither of those 2 things I would entrust myself with, because that feels like a lot of guilt to carry with me if something goes wrong, transparently. And I think actually the newer generations have way more access just due to social media and some of these others. But that's what I would have told that person, because I remember being 16 and taking all those career tests. I'm like, I don't know what most of these mean. I was so confused to a point where I thought I wanted to be an actuary. I did not want to be an actuary. After learning what actuaries actually do, great career, not for me. Around it, I think that's probably what I would tell is you can create your own career. If you don't like
Be who
any of
you want to
these,
be.
yeah.
Anything's possible. Anything. Great advice and true, very true. What will be the best way for people to get in touch with you?
With me, LinkedIn is probably the fastest way to get a hold of me. It's just Ellza Malok.
We'll have the link.
Yep.
We'll have
And then for any inquiries on BNG, we've got a whole library on our protocol if you have questions. And then there's a link to talk to myself or one of our team members if you'd like to further the conversation. And heck, if you just want to talk about Outlive, I'm happy to. It's actually a really interesting read, especially on sleep. I learned a lot about the lack of sleep and the impact on longevity that I need to take seriously.
Deprivation mode at the moment for the last week or two. Look, Ellza, thank you so much. It's been an amazing conversation today. And as always, when you and I have a chat, it's like it broaches the subject that the next conversation could be twice as long. This certainly is the longest session that I've ever had to date. We're only sort of 11 podcasts in the can now, but you're cracking on to nearly 3 hours. We're definitely going to cut this down into different sections. Thank you so much for your time today and your insights. It's been wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a delight.